welcome to the Margin Business Digital Entrepreneur Podcast. In today's episode, we got David Miller. David is the founder at the law office of David Allen Miller. David is an attorney for Amazon and other e-commerce sellers. He's experienced with Amazon suspension, compliance issues, intellectual property, and business law. And he definitely can reply to all your questions. Let's find out what he has to say about Amazon suspensions, compliance issues, intellectual property, and general business law. Welcome, David.
My name is David Miller. I'm an attorney. I work primarily with Amazon and other types of e-commerce businesses. I started a while back now, a good 5 years ago or so. I got my first job out of law school working for an IP law firm, and they kind of catered towards Amazon businesses. So I just learned a lot about Amazon, particularly with intellectual property law, business law, and a ton of account recovery. So dealing with Amazon suspensions, from listing suspensions all the way to account suspensions and entire businesses being shut down. That's kind of where my experience started. And I've just kind of built it all from there. I started just learning and really just expanding.
Okay, that's already really good. It's a hot topic in the Amazon world, and wow, it's there I cannot get deep enough into this matter, because there is not many who actually can do what they say, actually. So it's a very delicate matter as well, in the same way, and there definitely need to be some specialized people in order to do it. I myself, when this first happened to me, I was like, yeah, whatever, I'm gonna try it myself. No, it's not that easy. I ended up like doing my best, writing, I think, like a 3-pager, really like an action plan, and all that for a normal suspension. It worked after the, I don't know, 3rd, 4th time, but I actually, nowadays, I think you will even risk that you get blocked permanently if you exceed a number of requests in order to reopen your account by yourself. So definitely it's needed to have somebody professional looking into this, like David. Is this what currently you're looking at as well? I mean, what I just explained?
Yeah, sure. So there's tons of service providers out there that, promise you the world. They come up with, all sorts of guarantees. And I tell all my clients, or anytime I get a call, that no one can guarantee you anything when it comes to Amazon. So if anyone's guaranteeing you A through Z, should really be hesitant about what their intentions really are, because it's just impossible to actually guarantee anything. With that being said, Amazon does have a process for reinstating accounts. And those are always the most serious, because I explain it as, imagine you had a retail business and somebody walked into your store one day and said, you can't sell another product because we don't like the way your hair looks that day, or we just said you can't, you're violating something. We're not going to tell you what you're violating specifically. That's kind of your job to figure out why we're upset and why we're blacklisting you. So that's really what it is online. As an Amazon seller, you get a notification one day and they tell you you can no longer sell, and it's just out of nowhere. Most of the time it's out of nowhere. There are times where there are warnings, or they give you a certain amount of time to respond. So that's why there are many things you can put in place to prepare. You don't want to panic, but you have to expect the worst. So you don't want to be fearful, but it's still something that you should always expect. And what I mean by that is always be constantly reviewing Amazon's policies, making sure you have invoices in order. I just see all the time where, for example, someone gets an inauthentic suspension and Amazon's pointing to one particular product. And my first question almost always is, okay, do you have an invoice? And they tell me they don't have one, or there's some sort of story behind why they can't get it. These are examples of, you need an invoice for products. You have to be able to defend products, because if there's an inauthentic accusation, a counterfeit accusation, we have to be able to show that that's not accurate. If we don't have an invoice for starters, as the most classic example, it's harder to defend against, and it becomes much more difficult to actually reinstate the account. So you have to put certain things in place so that, if it ever happens, you want to be prepared so that you don't have to automatically push that panic button. You have to kind of calm down, first try and review why an account was suspended, and then take it from there. If you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, it shouldn't be overly difficult to get the account back up. If it's something that maybe you weren't supposed to be doing, or maybe you didn't know you weren't supposed to be doing it, then it becomes tougher, but it's not impossible. I've seen Amazon sellers make significant mistakes, do something that is either completely violating Amazon's policy or even maybe illegal, and Amazon sometimes still will give you a second or a third shot to continue selling. So again, try and do everything you're supposed to. Try and reinstate the account yourself, but you do want to be careful about what you put in those plans of action. And if none of that works, you can always contact an expert.
That's really good. But sometimes I have seen it now twice already. I'll give you an example. There is a customer of ours. They were suddenly approached by the Amazon customer service saying their account is blocked. Okay, we talk about a brand which has 20 years of history of being an international well-known brand. Okay, so, and they tell them you have counterfeit products. How is that possible? I mean, how Amazon can do that in that case? Okay, if it was a mistake from the AI, fine. Okay, like 1-2 days, maybe they say, okay, I'm sorry, we reopen. It took them literally, I think, 1 month to reopen the account after several attempts with lawyers to reopen the account. This was a big seller, and it's still very, very strange up to this day that it happened, and no compensation at all. So what are big sellers supposed to do in that case? I mean, it's like you drive a Mercedes and somebody comes, okay, that's not a Mercedes, I'm going to take the Mercedes from you, and you right. Suddenly need to walk.
Right. So no, it's a great question, and it's something that comes up all the time. It's not something that people think comes up all the time, but it actually does. It's not always just small sellers that this happens to, or mom and pop shops. Sometimes it's bigger companies who are doing, could be eight figures of revenue, maybe more a year. So here's what I'll say to start off of your point. Inauthentic versus counterfeit on Amazon are two actually entirely different things. So counterfeit is when someone files a complaint, an intellectual property complaint, that you're infringing on their IP. Okay, so that's what's known as counterfeit. Most of the time, a trademark number will be included in the complaint. They'll also tell you exactly who filed it. They'll give you usually a company name. They'll almost always give you an email address, and you'll have a trademark number and a complaint ID. Inauthentic, on the other hand, there's no rights owner. There's no one that actually filed the complaint. There's a few different ways that this can come up. Most of the time, it has to do with Amazon flagging it for some sort of reason. So most of the time, it's typically has to do with negative feedback. So if, let's say, there's not a specific number, Amazon doesn't say like, okay, you got 5 negative reviews, now we're going to suspend that particular product and maybe the account. So it's another question I get constantly. There's not a specific number. But when there's negative feedback, say there's 5 customers that complain, they could use buzzwords, for example. Sometimes Amazon's bots pick them up. But again, there is a significant difference. So my hunch with the example you provided is that this was more of an inauthentic issue rather than a counterfeit one, because it's hard for a company to file a complaint against a particular brand when it's the brand's listing, it's the brand's products. But that does actually happen, believe it or not. It's a whole other story, so we're not going to get into that right now. But what I suspect is that there were multiple negative reviews, maybe some buzzwords about the products either being fake or knockoffs, or it could just be something as simple as multiple customers receive damaged products, for example, or maybe a prior older model didn't look like the one, the new one they got. So they just assumed it was a knockoff, even though it wasn't. There's lots of different reasons. So my advice in those situations is it's vital to figure out what caused it. So if it was flagged, you have to figure out why it happened. So if there's no negative feedback and you have perfect invoices, it's not as vital because you have all the information. Like, well, we're not really sure. We suspect it's because of A or B. But if you have an invoice with a brand name on it, and even better, in your example, you are the brand, it shouldn't take a month to get reinstated, even though I know it does happen. So it really varies depending on how busy Amazon's teams are and how good your invoices are. I've seen little minor things that also affect, the time for Amazon to get back to you. Sometimes as simple as the quantity on the invoice not matching the sales. So nothing wrong with the invoice. The date is fine. The invoice looks great, but sometimes sellers don't include enough units for the ones they sold. So if you sold 1,000 units, but the invoice itself only shows 10, Amazon's not going to tell you that's why they're rejecting you, but that's the reason. I've seen sellers do it where it drives them crazy, and then they're happy that I pointed out to them. It's like, well, why isn't this working? It's driving me nuts. This is why. So that, again, there's just kind of a lot to brush over with those specific scenarios, because a lot of minor things can cause suspensions. Sometimes they're more serious, but you have to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to really get to the bottom of it.
But this is exactly what I'm saying. Amazon don't provide us with information. It's like I mean, everyone knows now you're at the mercy of Amazon, literally. When you go and do this, it's and sell, and you're a multi-million-dollar seller, for example, and you miss the train to jump on the train to go on eBay and to go on Shopify and to do some things, and you really were very focused on Amazon, and suddenly they shut you down. I mean, I cannot imagine something more horrible. It's your life gets destroyed. You wake up in the morning, you look at your phone, and your Amazon account has been suspended. That's it. Boom. So
it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And when it's, if it's an Amazon business where it's a side business and they're, the seller is not, relying on that as their primary source of income,
different, yeah.
it's a little bit different. But there are many, many sellers out there where Amazon is their full-time, that's their full-time gig. So that's where all of their income is coming from. And it's tough to really know where Amazon is at. They go through trends with suspending sellers for different types of reasons. I've noticed in the past where 1 month they're shutting down a lot of sellers for drop shipping. The next month it's intellectual property seems to be the new thing of the month. So it's a very tough thing to kind of counteract, because you don't really know when it's coming. It's like someone kind of punching you from behind. You can't, if you see it coming, maybe you can put your gloves up, but you kind of can't really do that with Amazon in this e-com world. So what I always say to sellers is just to, make sure you have someone on either your team, or whether it's hiring someone outside, or even yourself. If you don't want to hire anybody, you have to be extremely careful with Amazon policies, because as you grow, problems are going to happen. It's really not an if, it's a when. That's just kind of the game with Amazon. Seen big sellers do it. There are some classic, newbie mistakes, and then there's ones that are way more sophisticated that I see, happen. But you have to just be extremely careful. The biggest one I mentioned is just having invoices and being careful about the listings that you're actually joining. So if you're joining a listing, you have to be very careful to make sure that the model number and everything matches exactly. Another very minor issue, where if it's an older model number and someone complains about it and it happens to you multiple other times, it can become a bigger issue. So you want to always be checking for the minor issues to make sure they don't cause bigger ones. If you get a negative review, every now and then, or even Amazon removes a product or two of yours, it doesn't mean your whole account is going to go down. I'm not saying that, but when negative reviews or ASIN suspensions accumulate, the more and more likely you're going to have an account suspension.
This is as well exactly the reasons why I always say you need to diversify. Even if you seem untouchable as a multi-million-dollar seller, you have to diversify. I mean, now everyone knows it, but if you go a
Right.
few years back, like 2012, 2013, 2014, there was still not this issues with Amazon what we have today. So there were plenty which were caught off guard because they didn't care that Amazon.com was running, the hundreds of employees, but the impact is super strong. And I think there need to be something done to protect sellers, because this, I call it straight up a monopoly. This is nothing else, and it's a legal monopoly, and I still don't understand how they can do this without being fined heavily left and right. How is this possible?
Yeah, it's horrible, but at the end of the day, no one can force Amazon to do business with them. That's really what it is. So
Definitely.
a lot of
Yes.
sellers don't view it as a partnership, but that's essentially what you are. Amazon's getting a percentage of your fees. They're letting you sell on their platform. You're exposed to millions and millions of customers every single day. So you take the good of the good with the bad. It's tough, but I do know that recently, I believe it was in Germany, where there was a case where the highest court in Germany actually ruled with the seller as far as an unlawful suspension of the account.
Yes, it was a quite a big seller. As far as I remember, I don't,
Yes.
I forgot the name, but I heard about that.
Right. So I found that very interesting. A colleague that I have out in Germany, just posted it and tagged me in it on LinkedIn. So I found it very interesting, and I wonder if other countries will follow suit at some point, because that's, as far as I'm aware, that's the first one that I've heard of. When you're an Amazon seller, you really can only arbitrate for the most part against Amazon, and it almost never results in an account reinstatement. So when a seller goes to arbitration, say their appeals are failing, that's usually the last step, which is really arbitration, just a more informal court procedure. So instead of there being a judge, there's what we call an arbitrator, an independent third party to rule on who wins the case, essentially. And it's usually done through Zoom. But typically, these cases are only to recover inventory or withheld funds. And that's anytime someone asks if their reason for going to arbitration is to reinstate the account, then you should not be going to arbitration, because Amazon rarely, if ever, will actually reinstate the account. It's almost always about funds or inventory, and it has to be enough that it's worth paying the arbitration fees, paying the legal fees. So it has to be a significant amount. If it's $1,000 worth of funds that are withheld, you're going to end up in the red. You're going to end up down, a lot of money. So it wouldn't make sense. But Germany, maybe there'll be other countries that follow suit, where maybe they won't be the only one, that Amazon can't just click a button, or if someone sees something but doesn't really investigate, and now they have to deal with a month-long or several month suspension. It's just not right. And I think other countries do have to catch up.
Oh, definitely. For example, the US, I know the laws are um, very consumer orientated. So there is possibilities of collected lawsuits and all of this, which in Europe, it's not in this, let's say in this way you cannot do it, but in the States you can. So would there be a possibility, or has anybody tried things like this against Amazon within the US?
Yeah, so they've tried, but sellers don't really have success. So consumer oriented, Amazon doesn't view their sellers as consumers. They're expendable. So seller about is the customers, who's buying from the Amazon sellers, as well as from, I believe it's over 50%, I think, of Amazon's sales are coming from the third party. So not sure why, they, and consumers, they're way more concerned with the consumer. They've always been consumer oriented. So it's, as far as the sellers themselves, there hasn't been any real push, as far as I'm aware, to get accounts back up. There's been many consumer lawsuits and consumers have sued Amazon and things of that sort. But as far as I'm aware, if a seller tries to sue Amazon, unless it's something extremely specific, it's almost always pointed in the direction of the agreement you sign when you sell on Amazon. You agree to go to arbitration if there's any sort of legal issue.
Okay, I mean, we go very deep already into the matter of the legal proceedings within Amazon in the world, or as well within the US. But I think it's just for information. But I think personally, as you said, there is plenty ways how you can prevent all of this, and how you can really build up an empire without having all of these issues. For example, what would be your suggestion, or how can you help Amazon sellers, for example, to make to sell more or to sell better on the marketplace without really, I mean, okay, you reopen accounts, but before there's already ways which you make sure that you're stable and can go for it. Obviously, brand registry is one of it. What would be your suggestion? Would be in this matter?
It's a great question, because I'm usually dealing with the problem after it already arises. So then usually it's like, oh, well, if the seller never did this, then they wouldn't have been suspended. Or if they didn't do that, they wouldn't have been suspended. So I always like talking about this, where you can avoid that entirely, because it's almost too late when the mistake was already made.
Yeah.
So there's a few just high risk procedures with selling on Amazon. So drop shipping, for example, it was widely popular about, I'd say, 4 to 5 years ago. There's still plenty of drop shippers, but I think it's more well known now that it's much riskier. There are drop shippers that can do very, very well, but in my experience, it's more of a short-term game. Long term, you're bound to run into problems. Not knocking drop shipping entirely, because there are certain things you can do on Amazon, but most of the time, the benefit to drop shippers, they'll most of the time be violating Amazon policy. So they'll usually run into problems. So that's one. Another is a more obvious one, but I've seen it plenty, so I feel obligated to bring it up. Forging documents, manipulating documents. Sometimes I brought up an example where someone doesn't have an invoice, right? If you don't have an invoice, it's better to explain why you don't have one, what went wrong, than to try and make one yourself. Like, again, I think that's an obvious suggestion. I've seen sellers do it. And once that happens and Amazon flags you for it, it's as close to being blacklisted on Amazon as you could ever be. So be extremely careful. And then to piggyback off of that, this is a wild one. I haven't seen it in a while, but I saw it within the last couple of years multiple times. Don't write anything on your invoices. Don't, like, I've seen where, like, even random notes that you write as it could be an ASIN number, or even redacting pricing. I've seen Amazon actually says in their notices you can redact pricing information. I've seen that actually cause suspensions. Amazon thinks that you're manipulating your documents. I've seen them cause it. So it only took me one time to ever see it, and I saw it more than once to suggest don't write anything on them, other than maybe highlighting what you want Amazon to see in yellow. Don't write on them. Don't Photoshop. These are just issues that I've seen come up that cause suspensions, and when they do, it's an absolute nightmare. Those are two big ones. And then again, as far as invoices, you have to know what Amazon wants. It's worth taking the time to either do your own research for what Amazon wants to see on an invoice, not just in any invoice. Like, I've seen someone try to provide a Word document to Amazon and call it an invoice. That's not going to work. So if you're not sure what Amazon provides, research to see what they typically ask for, because there's been plenty of other sellers who have dealt with it before. Or if you want to take it a step further and really double and triple check, you can call me, you can call another attorney, you can call an Amazon expert. People know it's pretty common what Amazon wants. They want to see who you bought the product from. They want a date on it. They want to see that the quantity matches your sales, or the quantity on the invoice exceeds your sales. And they don't want to see They don't want to see an address, for example, that doesn't match the online address. So if you're buying from Nike, let's say, and the address is not correct, Amazon's going to look at that and they're probably going to deny your invoice. Also, if the supplier doesn't have any sort of online presence, again, more unlikely that they're going to actually accept it, because almost every company, most legitimate companies nowadays have some sort of online presence, even if it's just a simple website. These are things you want to check for before you ever buy from them, let alone selling on Amazon. So all these things I've just mentioned, I've seen sellers dozens and dozens of times miss one or more of those issues. And then it's a lot harder to get the invoice approved once it's submitted to Amazon. So just to recap, go through your invoices, be extremely careful with drop shipping. Don't forge your documents and don't write on any of your invoices.
That's already really an amazing, not only one suggestion, these, as far as I can count, this was 4, yeah? So I think it's really good. Where can anyone contact you who have more questions about this issue or anything what arose in his Amazon career, which needs a specialist like from you, David, the opinion or even consultation or even help to step in directly?
Yeah, sure. So my telephone number is 516-313-1572. Email
Maybe here as
address.
well.
Yeah. Email address is david@damlawfirm.com. Feel free to contact me. I offer free consultations. So if you have any questions about anything I brought up or maybe something I didn't even cover, feel free to reach out.
That sounds really good. That's great. I have one last question for you. Please give us a message to the world for entrepreneurs or anyone out there, e-commerce seller in general. What would be your message?
So I've said this before, but I don't know. To me, it's maybe a bit cliche, but I just say go for it, because there are people who I think the risk side, and a lot of e-commerce business owners at some point or another took a giant leap of faith and took a big risk to start up their own business. Maybe they started as more of a side hustle that turned into something bigger. But if you don't ever start it, you're never going to be successful, at least doing something that you love. And it's a great industry. I love the people, especially, with regards to e-commerce. I also love traveling. So it's great to go to different events around the world. But that's really my advice, is really to just take that leap of faith. If it's that voice in your head that says like, oh, I've been wanting to try this for a long time. And even if it's not e-commerce, if it's anything else business related, if you don't ever start, it's never going to happen. And if you wait for the perfect time, also probably never going to happen. So sometimes you kind of just got to go for it and live with the consequences or live with the success.
Great. I think go for it is the best what we can get out of there. And definitely for everyone who wants to start an Amazon business or wants to be an entrepreneur or even is an entrepreneur and had to take some risk with the last funds he has, just do it. Go for it.
Yep. I think, that's what I did, starting my own law office. And like I said, that's what so many other business people did at some point in their careers. Jeff Bezos himself started in his garage.
Yes.
Right. So you don't have to be the next Jeff Bezos to earn a living or to come anywhere close to that. I think if your average business person were to go, let's say 1,000th of where Bezos became, I'd say that was one pretty great success.
Definitely. Thank you so much, David, for your insight today and for the great conversation. I hope to speak to you soon, maybe at an offline event. And let's pick this conversation up in maybe 6 to 12 months, because I think there will be a lot of changes and it will be worth it to definitely talk again.